Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to be going over everything you need to know about reactors. Reactors are what essentially determine your skill effectiveness, and they have a couple different multipliers attached to them. I think there's a total of 5 multipliers, and they all kind of function a little bit differently, and we're going to try to go through all of them. But the most important and maybe most difficult to understand are the random multipliers that get attached to every single reactor at the bottom. So once again, in today's video, we're just going to be going over and breaking down every component of the reactor and trying to help you determine what the best type of reactor and what stats you should be chasing. So the first thing and most important about a reactor is the skill power that is attached to it. So in this case, the reactor that I'm currently using, it has a skill power of 11,724. Why is this number so important? This determines the damage of all of your skills. It is the baseline for all of your stat scaling and everything like that. So again, I have 11,724 in case of Esimo. With his scaling, his first skill scales with 407% of his base reactor skill power. So that 11,000, and this is kind of how the damage is calculated, and that's why this number is so important. Sub attack power, not really relevant. I think that's just what determines your melee attack damage, so we're not really that concerned about it. In this case, we're just going to be focusing on skill power. The next section of your reactor is the optimization condition. This is where you get a little bit of a skill power boost depending on the type of weapon you have equipped. And in most endgame scenarios, you're going to want to use an ultimate level reactor. And with ultimate level reactors, they have optimization conditions that are specifically tied to ultimate weapons. But because it's tied to a specific ultimate weapon, you get an additional 60% skill power bonus instead of the regular 40 if you're using just a rare reactor. And then just to clarify what this optimization condition actually means, with ultimate reactors, when you have the secret garden, in my case, actually equipped, so like I have Esimo holding the secret garden in his hand actively. I'm not holding my assault rifle, I'm not holding my afterglow. Specifically, I'm holding the secret garden. That's when I get that additional 160% skill power boost. And then next up, you have what is your skill power boost ratios. These are further modifiers based on your active skill power. So basically, this is going to give my fire skills an additional 20% extra skill power to their effectiveness. And in addition, my tech skills will also get an additional 20% to their skill power effectiveness. So essentially, this means that my first and third skill, you can see in the little power, skill power when equipped, my Q and V skills, they have a higher skill power versus my other two skills. And this is because those two skills are tech versus the other two being fusion. So what this means is you want to have a reactor that is specifically tied to skill power boost ratios that your descendant primarily uses for their core skills. So again, Esimo really likes to use his bombs, which are his 1 and 3 skills. These are tech, so he wants to use tech. If you're using someone like Freyna, her poisons are primarily tech, so her 1, 3, and 4 are all tech skills. However, her second skill is dimension, but this essentially means that Freyna wouldn't really care about dimension. She's all about tech as well, but those are just some examples. In this next section, we're going to be going over how to calculate the actual skill power when equipped. This is relevant just to determine how much of a benefit your skills are going to actually have when you have certain reactors and different enhancements for those reactors equipped. Starting off, we're just going to use a basic reactor with no real damage modifiers in this case, so there's not an additional tech or fire skill modifier. What we do is we take our base skill power, so this 11,000, let me pull up a spreadsheet here. We take our base skill power, and then from there, we're going to multiply it by our mounting. So this would be the 1.6, and this gives us 17,697. And then from this point, we take that 17,697 and multiply it by our first skill power boost ratio. So in this case, that's fire, and that's going to be an additional 20%, which gives us 21,237. And then finally, we take that 21,237 and multiply that by our tech skill boost power ratio, which is an additional 20%. So this is going to come out to 25,484.45, and that gets us to that actual skill power when equipped. So that summarizes how we calculate skill power on a pretty basic reactor without taking any account for the additional effects found at the bottom of the reactor. So in this case, the one I'm showing now, it has additional skill attack when attacking Legion of Immortality, and it also has skill effect range. These two random effects, this is really what determines what a good reactor is going to be, and I think there could possibly be some confusion as to how these different effects scale. So we're going to start off with what is often perceived as one of the best options for a reactor. This is a very well-rounded option, and don't get me wrong, it is very strong. In this particular case, you want to have double skill power boost ratio modifiers. So in this case, with this reactor, it's going to boost both my tech and fire scaling ratios. And what's important to note about these specific power boost ratio modifiers is they're actually additive, similar to skill power modifier. You can just think of them as that. So what this does for the reactor is it takes our skill power boost ratio in the middle. So right now our fire and tech skill power boost ratios are both 20%. You then take these two modifiers and add it to their respective attribute. So in this case, the tech scaling would go from 20% to 27.4%, and then the fire boost ratio would go from 20% to 26.9%. The next stat I want to look over are these different scaling stats depending on the type of enemy you're attacking. So in the case of this reactor that I have equipped right now, it gives me additional skill attack when I'm attacking Legion of Immortality, and that's going to be an additional 2,530 skill power added to my base reactor's skill power. So this is an additive to your base skill power of the reactor. So it would go from 11,060 in this case to 13,590. So it would be a pretty substantial increase. But again, this is kind of conditional because it depends on the type of enemy you're attacking. If you're not attacking a Legion of Immortality, it's not going to give you any sort of benefit. Next, we're going to look at skill effective range. Right now, I have a reactor that doesn't have any sort of range difference. I don't have any kind of mods equipped that would affect my skill range. So we're going to look at what SUMO's grenades look like without any sort of skill effect range modifier on a reactor. So that did not center at all. But you see that this is kind of a small area of effect. Now, if we go ahead and equip one that does have skill effect, so this is going to increase my skill effect range by 25%. Let's see what this range looks like now. You can see that it's just already just a lot bigger. It almost reaches this other section of the square here. It's something to really consider if you're doing a bossing versus mobbing build, and this ability, this attribute is actually pretty solid on some Descendants. Next, we're going to be looking at skill cost and skill cooldown. So looking at SMO's first skill, it has a basic cooldown of 12 seconds and an MP cost of 12. So now if we go into our reactors and equip one that has both skill cooldown and skill cost, we can see what this does to our skills. So I'm going to reduce my cooldown by 7% and also the skill cost by 3.3%. And this looks like this. Our cooldown is now dropped by 0.9 seconds, almost an entire second, which is very good. And we also cut down on our MP cost by 0.4. So it's not the best, but on some Descendants, this can be pretty important. SMO is an example of a Descendant who does like some reduced mana cost, so this could be a good affix to have on your reactor. but overall I think MP cost probably isn't the most relevant. However, skill cooldown is very good for, especially on some Descendants, so don't sleep on that skill. And now the last couple of attributes I want to cover is going to be the crit rate modifiers. You have a skill critical hit rate. This is going to be how often you critical strike. And then also there's skill critical hit damage. That's going to be how much your critical hits actually deal damage. If we go into SMO's skills here, you can see that he has a base skill critical hit rate of 5%, pretty abysmal. And he has a skrill, I keep wanting to say skrill. He has a skill critical hit damage modifier of 1.4%, which means that his attacks that critical hit are going to be dealing an additional 40% damage of what they normally would. So what happens if we equip a reactor with a skill critical hit damage modifier attached to it? Well, that's going to take our 1.4 critical hit up to 1.87. My apologies, I mean 1.827. So basically you take that 1.4 and you multiply it by the 30.5% in here, and that's how you get that 1.8. And then similarly, if we equip a skill critical hit rate reactor, this has an additional 32.2% skill critical hit rate. This is going to take SMO's base 5% and only increase it by 1.6%. So it's taking us from 5% up to 6.61%. Overall, this could be really good for some Descendants who have a high base skill critical hit rate, but in the case of SMO, not going to be the case. Again, you basically take this 32.2%. It's a multiplicative modifier, which means you multiply 5% times 32.2%, and that just gives you your slight increase of 1.6%. In this last section, I want to cover a couple reactor combinations that are really strong depending on the type of content you're trying to do. So starting off, if you're trying to do some void intercepts and hunt Colossus, you're going to want Colossus damage on your reactor, and you can probably use this in some sort of combination of your skill power boost ratios. So again, in the case of SMO, this would be either the fire or the tech skill power boost ratios. This reactor that I have right now is probably going to be one that I use for a very long time. It's very strong in void intercepts, and I don't see myself switching anytime soon. And just to compare this against a reactor where we're using both the skill power boost ratios, so like this one, for example, I'm going to compare this reactor to one that has both the tech and fire just to show the relevance. So in this table, you can probably ignore the first column here. Basically, this second column is where we're using both the fire and tech scaling. And just one quick disclaimer, I'm using these double skill power boost ratios at a maximum relevancy, or at least something that's comparable. So in this case, I'm using a tech and fire skill boost ratio for this example of 8.3%. That's what I have shown here with this reactor right now. If I take a base reactor skill power of 11,724, that's what the base of this reactor is here. I'm not taking in the optimization condition because that's not really relevant for this calculation. But if I take that and multiply it by 28.3%, it gives me 15,042. And then if I take this 15,042 and multiply it by another 28.3%, it gives us a skill power of 19,299. Now, in this other column, we're comparing one skill power boost ratio versus one Colossus skill power or Legion of Immortality or whatever. So this is my reactor that I have currently equipped. If I were to take my 11,724, which again is the base of this reactor, and I add 2,394, that's the skill, the Colossus skill attack power bonus. That gives us a base reactor skill power rate of 14,118. And then we would multiply this by 20%, sorry. This is just my basic fire skill boost ratio. And then we take that 16,942 and we multiply that by 28.3%, which is our tech skill power boost ratio of 20%, with an additional 8.3% from the affix that's attached at the bottom here of, my tech skill power boost ratio. And that gives us a base skill power of 21,737, specifically when we're attacking Colossus. So overall, this reactor combination, when I'm fighting Colossus specifically, is going to be more powerful than the double skill power boost ratio reactors. However, for most other content, doing the double power or skill power boost ratio reactor is probably going to be a little bit more relevant. If you're doing some sort of mobbing though, and not like void reactors or something like that, you probably want to have some additional skill effect range. That's a very good modifier to have on your reactor. But also, I don't think you can go wrong with like skill cooldown or skill cost reduce. Both of those I think are also really strong. So really it's just kind of up to you and the reactors that you kind of get through RNG. But before I let you go, I also just kind of wanted to illustrate how the additional skill attack damage when attacking certain enemies kind of works. So I have two reactors here that give Esumo 0 benefit. They give the same amount of skill power of 11,060. And the only difference is that this reactor here, it has a tech skill power boost ratio. It is only 6.5%, but we're going to see how much damage this does to a Legion of Immortality enemy. So when I use this, it's doing 28,775. And then now I'm going to equip this Legion of Immortality reactor, and this is going to give me an additional 2,163. So now when I'm hitting this enemy, it's doing a pretty substantial damage increase. So hopefully that just illustrates how powerful those additional modifiers are for your reactor. Anyhow, that's going to be enough yapping from me. I apologize that this got really long-winded. I think there's just a lot of nuance to the reactors, and some skills just aren't quite fully defined, or not skills, but the actual modifiers that are on your reactor. So hopefully if you stayed this long, you learned something. If you did, make sure you drop a comment down below and like the video. I appreciate all of you. And this was Goober Troy just saying thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.